Good to see you out. I know it's Memorial Weekend, but I'm thrilled that you came out. We have something really special, I think, in store for us this morning that's going to be so informative and helpful in so many levels. Before we do, let me just mention real quickly, again, next Sunday is actually Anniversary Sunday. All right, so we're going to be celebrating here next Sunday, and I have a very special message. It's our Exploring Faith that we bring to Sunday morning, and I want to talk about the unpardonable sin. Have you ever heard of that? Have you committed it? Wow. Did somebody say yes? I don't know. It's a serious question, a serious issue. We're going to be talking about that next Sunday. And also, just a reminder that we'll be meeting Sunday night, 5 o'clock, Sunday night out, and burgers and hot dogs, baptizing outside. It's going to be a great time. Exploring Faith is usually the first Wednesday of the month, but I need to move it back a week from the 7th to the 14th. Is that okay? I want to go see my grandkids. I have not seen them since December, and we are going to see the grandchildren play. 2 of them made the all-star team. Oh, yeah. I'm bragging. I am bragging, and we're going to go see them play. Also, at the credenza, as you go out in the east lobby, if you parked out there, if you parked in the west parking lot, there's a table right here. Back a couple of weeks ago, I mentioned a list of verses, and there's a list there for you to pick up that talk about the hope that in the all will be saved. Those lists of verses are out there for you, and you can pick them up. There is a copy of a little booklet out there on the table. There's only like 7 of them still in print. So you can pick that up if you'd like. They're free. You can pick that up. First come, first serve. Don't leave before church is over. All right. Really, we're going to be discussing this morning a very serious subject that has impacted several families. Several families right here within our church family, as well as many of you that are watching from home. And it's impacting our nation in a serious way. May is National Mental Health Awareness Month. And so that's what we'd like to do is just talk to you in a dialogue, as I've invited Dr. Paul Carlisle to join. Welcome, Dr. Paul Carlisle. And I'm going to sit down and join him. We're just going to sit down and have a conversation. How's that sound? I like this idea of sitting up here. This is nice. Dr. Carlisle is a licensed therapist and psychologist, been practicing for decades and decades and decades and decades. A long time. But welcome, Paul. Glad you're here.
Good to be here.
Before we get into the discussion, I just put this up here on the screen. When we talk about mental health issues, this is kind of a working definition. So you say, what are we talking about? Health conditions that involve changes, sometimes significant changes in emotions or moods, thinking or behavior, or sometimes it's a combination of these. Mental illness is often associated with problems functioning in social, work, and family activities. It certainly does impact. Now, here's some statistics just to give you, and this comes from the National Alliance on Mental Illness. 1 in 5 U.S. adults experience mental illness each year. 1 in 5. 1 in 20 U.S. adults experience serious mental illness issues each year. This is the thing that's really alarming, folks, is the way this is impacting the next generations coming up. 1 in 6 U.S. youth aged 6 to 17 experience a mental health disorder every year. 50% of all lifetime mental illness begins by the age of 24. Suicide is the second leading cause of death among people age, and you're reading that correctly, 10. Can you imagine a 10-year-old contemplating taking their life? We were talking about this, and I was just riding my bike all over my little town at age 10 with not a care in the world. Things have changed. I have personally done a funeral service for a 13-year-old who took his own life. So, second leading cause of death. between ages 10 to 14. And suicide is the third leading cause of death among those 15 to 24. By the way, suicide rose in ages, according to MIT. MIT did a study saying that in ages 10 to 24, suicide rose by 57%. 57% from the years 2007 to 2017. Rose 57%. And I think I got one more of these. 46% of people who die by suicide had a diagnosis of mental health condition sometime in their life. So, Paul, when we talk about mental health and when you deal with mental health issues in your practice, what are some of the main conditions that point to a mental health issue? So just some of the conditions that would come under the headline of mental health.
Yeah, the most common reflects some of the statistics here. Anxiety, if you think of it in a very broad form, from what we'd call just generalized anxiety to OCD, to panic attacks, to PTSD. About 20% of the population at any one time is wrestling with that. Another feature is depression. We use that word a lot. It gets a lot of time on the TV. About 10% of that particular group. And there really is a difference. When you think of mental health, let's just take depression. We use the word depressed, I think, very freely. Sometimes a person, if they just have like heaviness in their body, they're pretty tired, and it only lasts a couple hours, that's sort of a blueness, a discouragement. Maybe it lasts a day. To hit the clinical level, you have to have about 8 characteristics, those 2 included, for up to 2 weeks. So by the 2-week point, if someone's having a clinical depression, it's literally, Fred, become painful. We know now that in your brain, the emotional pain center and the physical pain center are very close. So when people say, my mental illness hurts, they're not kidding. It really does that. Addictive behaviors at one time were pretty significant, but today, and you've hit it on the head, is the self-harm. So much of that out there. Then there are tons of categories under those. Relationships, because of mental illness, are difficult. And sometimes relationships are the origin, if it's young enough, for certain mental illnesses.
And since on Memorial Weekend, and we're remembering veterans who gave their lives, those who come back, and those who are in very high stress type of occupation. So PTSD kind of falls into this category, correct?
Yeah, it does. It does. PTSD came on the scene in the Vietnam conflict, or the war, and we begin to realize that you can overload your mental, emotional system, your brain, in such a way that when you're no longer in threat, like some of these soldiers would be in a doctor's office, and they would literally begin to see, feel as if they were back in Vietnam in a firefight. And so that came on the screen of the mental health group about the same time that we begin to get more understanding of how the brain works. And there is a severe enough trauma that when your brain triggers it today, even though it happened 1 year, 10 years ago, there's a part of your brain that believes you are back there. It can be overwhelming. And that pain level goes up high. And let me just give a note. Mental illness, when it begins to interrupt your daily routines and those type things and becomes that painful, people are going to do something. Now, it's not always the healthiest thing, Fred, that people do. But when you have a pain emotional enough, you're going to try to ease it. And there's healthier ways to do that. We may talk about that later, and there are unhealthy ways. But PTSD, we begin to realize, was not just the vets, but that children can have that. Of course, if we've got a 10-year-old that's contemplating suicide, something's really wrong, historically or genetically, something with that child. So yeah, PTSD features are pretty significant. You can have them as an adult from a critical accident, from spousal abuse, and I know we'll talk about this over in the social media area, but bullying of sorts does that as well.
Well, I didn't talk about it at the time. It's been quite some time now, but my oldest son spent a year in Iraq, and he was crew chief and flew missions during the war, saw action. It was 1 year. The excitement of him coming home was something I'll never forget. Stepping off the plane, it was such a high. But when he walked by, I've known him, obviously, his entire life, and I could tell something was different. And it took a long time for him to be able to re-enter into everyday life. I mean, it was just, and there were behaviors that were so risky to get that adrenaline rush again. He would ride his motorcycle, and I'd be like, oh my goodness gracious. It's like you're trying to get something.
Yes.
And so, yeah, some of the ways of dealing with it are really unhealthy. Substance abuse is often tied with this as a way
Yes.
of dealing with it.
Yeah, it's very easy to get relief, and I'm not in any way saying people are doing it inappropriately till it becomes a problem, but they do try to get relief. It can be the dopamine, kind of that big adrenaline kick, like with your son, but alcohol's very available, and I'm a guy that I'm okay with you drinking alcohol. Just don't plaster yourself up against the wall. And those are ways. Marijuana. I mean, I see a lot of those uses, and what they're needing is something of that sort. And a comment about your son: PTSD can happen to the strongest person of character and background, because what PTSD does is it overloads your brain, and you can't get away from whatever the situation is. One of the features is kind of a trapped sense, like you can't get away. So even when Pastor Fred's son's back over here when he first came, he can be trapped in kind of his memory system.
Yeah, it was, we were there on the 4th of July right after, and this is several, and he's doing fantastic now, but the fireworks would go off. And my goodness, his reaction and response was incredible.
Yes. Yes.
And almost to the floor.
Yes.
We were standing in a Walmart, I believe. And
Yes.
Goodness. Well, and then it also leads to self-harm. And then, of course, some of the effects that we see is, people lose their jobs. Students cease attending classes. You see grades drop dramatically. Sometimes quitting school is a way they deal with it.
Relationships take a hit.
Relationships, marriages, families take a big hit. By the way, our communities are impacted by this right now. This is a financial hit. We're throwing all kinds of money trying to deal with this issue. And on the extreme side of mental illness is the violence side of it.
Yes.
So because there are those suffering from mental illness that do resort to violence. And so we're seeing this all the time. And it is a growing serious issue. Paul, if there's parents out here right now listening going, or maybe a spouse, what are some of the things, warning signs that you can mention that would say, hey, here's some things that indicate we have a problem?
If it's a spouse or someone you know well, if it can be known graciously, a childhood history we know today, we didn't know this. Actually, we weren't acting on it a lot in the psychological community till close to when PTSD came in, and we understood the brain. The brain is highly emotional. We didn't know that. A lot of our historical parenting was a little bit more mechanical, like, you know this, do this, and there's this emotional development that has to happen. As a matter of fact, the last trimester, the infant's emotional brain is online and working at full speed. The cognitive brain, the part of it that does the cognitive function, doesn't come online till nearly 2. So everybody's got a very strong emotional history. And so in the midst of all of this is this emotional sense. So if someone had difficulties in childhood, and I don't mean they were physically harmed only, if that emotional need is not addressed, it will have to be addressed at some point for you to, and I'm going to give you a little bit of my Christianity, to mature. See, because when you can't access your emotional brain, you can't access all of you. And you need that aspect to balance the thinking and the thinking to balance the emotions. So if you knew the background, that would be helpful if there was some stuff back there. I don't know who doesn't have some. I'm sure some of you don't. I just would like to talk to you and see if it's true.
Yeah.
It's a healthy person, Jim.
So maybe mood changes, like a prolonged sadness, would be something.
Prolonged is one of the kickers. You can go, the web would give you the main characteristics of depression or anxiety. What you're looking for is, does it begin to interrupt, whichever one we're talking about, does it begin to interrupt your different dimensions of your life? Is it making it harder to work? I don't mean like everybody's got hard weeks, but is it making it progressively more difficult? Is it making relationships more difficult? Is it making the relationship with God more difficult? Is it hitting friendship arenas? That's what you're looking for at the beginning. Now, let me tell you what I think you're going to run into. I'm pretty sure of this. No one wants to say they have a mental illness. I mean, has anyone ever got applauded for that? Like, hey, that dude is depressed, you know? No, that doesn't happen. I have a history of mental illness a couple of generations back, and still deal with part of that, and it's a very real thing for us. But noticing if it's teens or children, you can even, like, how are they doing in school, like if it's okay there, not so much in another arena. You're looking for it to begin to impact all of them. And I would rather people go and seek help, even if you miss it. You know, I would rather you be out ahead of the curve.
Yeah, because there's no exact science for diagnosing it.
No, we do have
blood
today.
test you can run
No.
and say, yeah, here it is.
No, what we do have today is a way to check the DNA/genetics to get a bit of a feel. That's a big progress. Would someone have a tendency toward? And also, it will guide medication application.
Going to shift gears here and talk about something that I think is so relevant to everybody in the room, particularly parents. Seldom do I get on a meddling soapbox. You may feel different. But this is an area of great concern of mine as a pastor, as a father, grandfather in particular. Paul, can we just spend a few moments talking about social media?
Yeah, it's important.
And we'll just have a conversation here. You and I have talked about this a little bit in the past, and you can listen in. I'm not expecting everybody to agree with everything that is said here. But certainly, first of all, there are benefits to social media. There are things that are good about it, no question. But there are some serious dangers to social media. And I cannot help but think, and by the way, research is showing this to be the case.
Yeah.
From the National Psychiatric Association, MIT just released a study of the impact that social media is having upon our young people. we are seeing a spike in anxiety and mood changes and depression at really young ages. And so I would like to talk a little bit about the dangers of social media. And I do think every parent, you know, you have to make a decision on how you're going to handle this, but it's important to know. One reason I think it can be tied to depression and such is because social media is addictive. And it's not just addictive, if that's a term we slap on it. It is a scientifically proven addictive behavior because
because your brain likes novel activity, meaning new things. Now, I know some of you have your routines if you're like me, especially you're my age, and I don't really shift off of those, but the brain wants to see a new picture, a new cartoon, a new movie, I've got one client that's a welder, so he's addicted to YouTube on how to weld. So I'm just telling you, it's out there everywhere. And that novelty connects with the part of your brain that produces dopamine, and dopamine's kind of that shot of, woohoo, let's do that again. You see it in teens a lot because their brain's still developing, but sometimes the woohoo gets ahead of the consequences, right? Like, this is going to really be fun. Oh, I shouldn't have jumped off of that, that type thing. So the other thing that makes it addictive is the accessibility. Like, if I'm going to go, like I grew up in a drug, alcohol, family structure. If I'm going to go get drugs that are illegal, I can't just pull up the iPad and get me some in that sense. I have to do something to go and get that. But that is available 24/7. And what it assumes is that we have willpower, which I don't have enough. I'm assuming you agree with me about yourself. Not enough. You have to have that. And when we talk about children and teens, willpower is still developing. As a matter of fact, parents are sort of that willpower structure for them as much as kids may not like that.
And the thing to keep in mind on whatever the app is or whatever the social media application is that you're using, it's important to remember that you are not the consumer. They're using you to sell. So you're not the consumer. You're not on there going, oh, I'm purchasing. No, they're using you. And one of the things that they understand about this addictive behavior is they know what you like. So how many of you know that when you pull something up or you watch something on TikTok in particular or Facebook or whatever, all of the sudden you're flooded with that particular type of video or information? Come on. How many of you know that's true? That's because there's an algorithm that you don't control that they do. And what they're doing is, if they can get you on here as much as possible, they can then sell their ads for more money. And so all of this is being used. And again, I'm not saying it's all bad, just understand it. Understand what is happening. They know the power of keeping you there. And social media has it's kind of like a slot machine. Have you ever played a slot machine?
No.
It's church. All of you like, no way, Pastor Fred. By the way, what you can tell when somebody's not telling the truth is after they answer something and they take a quick drink of water, you can usually tell it's not.
It's the best wine I've ever had right there. Tell them.
So there's this idea of the slot machine that I have played, by the way, and I love it. It's a lot of fun. So a slot machine, but it keeps you going there. Bells, whistles, lights, all kinds of things that keep somebody attracted to it. So, but here are some of the dangers. You say, well, so what's so bad about it? Why is this now, data is showing this is tied to a significant rise in mental health issues among our students. So it's addictive for one. Think about the peer pressure that is on social media today that's
Yes.
unlike anything we've seen.
Well, when we were growing up, you could get bullied at school, but it wasn't videoed or promoted on something like that. You didn't walk around the rest of your life having to, that being out there, not being able to erase that event.
Yeah, and then the bullying now. Guys bully physically, generally speaking. All right, generally speaking, guys will bully physically, but females can bully verbally. And now this is happening on social media at an alarming rate. Talk a little bit about comparison. So there is a comparison syndrome on social media that says we look at everybody's best pictures and then our life doesn't seem to measure up.
Yeah, there's a bit of work that's been done in that what you are seeing, if it's like a physical image or someone performing a particular activity that's really cool, is that you're looking at the top 5% of the population that will ever be able to look or do that. And then if that becomes your comparison, you'll never win. I was telling you, Pastor Fred, a little earlier, I'm a proponent of average being really good. Average is good. My family didn't think a C was good. That was average. But I'm telling you, across the board, average is good. And you're going to have areas that you exceed in, but it may not be popular on social media. The challenge for teens and children that's different than you as an adult or me as an adult or Fred, if we consider him an adult, that would be good, is this: their brains aren't done yet. They're not. They actually would be better off, and I hope you'll share some of the people that created the social media, kind of their opinion at some point, but they do not need that comparison. Their mind already does that naturally. They don't need 50 other images or ideas along the way.
Yeah, and then there is something that is, they just use FOMO, fear of missing out. This is a real thing that we feel like if we're not looking at social media, we are going to miss the newest, latest, greatest thing that comes out. And so this fear of missing out is generated by social media. They know what they're doing.
Yes.
So how many of you have heard, you can watch this on Netflix. Now, this is a very practical conversation today. How many of you have heard of The Social Dilemma? I'm not talking about the movie The Social Network where Facebook came about. I'm talking about a documentary called The Social Dilemma. 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 4 or 5 of you. I hope that at some point when I say, how many of you have seen The Social Dilemma, every parent will have raised their hand. I encourage you as your pastor, it's a must watch. Because what this does is they actually interview the individuals who were the founders of all of this stuff. From Facebook, YouTube, these things. Here's what they say in their interview. This is not what we set out to do. We've created a monster that we can't reel back in. And it is a money-making monster. And if the wrong people are in control of this, we are just reaping horrendous consequences. One of the things I encourage you with as parents, listen to when these individuals, not faith-based, not follower of Jesus-based, just for what they know about social media and when they let their young people have access. You might really be surprised. I mean, they sound like somebody who'd be in a real fundamental religious group. And they're just like, here's the strict guidelines that we place upon our kids. Everybody's doing it. So kids are going to push for it, right? But let's understand they don't always grasp what is best for them. And parents, this is the challenge of tweens and teenagers. This is the challenge you're going to have, is how do you monitor and regulate social media? But it's a major big deal. And
it needs to be monitored by adults, somebody.
Yeah, I agree. And I know that this probably reveals my age, and you're like, Pastor Fred, you're old-fashioned, and that would never work today. When my kids got angry and would go in and shut their door, and I'd say, what's going on in there? And they'd be like, nothing. I just went and got a screwdriver and took their door off.
In the name of Jesus.
In the name of, yeah. I'm like, wait a minute. I don't know if you guys realize this. I pay for this. And you will follow the guidelines that I have. And so I want to know what you're doing in there. And of course, thankfully, phones were just coming out and such, and we were so way off. I'm like, you don't need a phone until you're 16 driving, you break down, you can use it.
Yeah.
So, and I know that's all different today. Kids are getting phones a lot younger, but to every parent out there, it's something to think about. You think about it. You guys talk about it. You got to do what you think. But I think you got to be heavily involved in the social media lives of your kids.
Yes.
You look at it together. The most boring night for your students to do that. But every once in a while, do a check-in. Have access to their accounts and look at it, because this is a serious, serious thing. On top of all the other serious connections that we know that lead to horrendous things, oftentimes your students are not telling you about the bullying.
That's right.
And there is a real peer pressure here that's taken peer pressure to a whole nother level of pressure. Well, we didn't get to that. I want to do this real quick because we're about out of time, and you've talked way too much. Paul, I mean, seriously, brought you up here. And let's ask this question before we go. This is a faith-based question. I get this a lot. A lot of Christians think it's a lack of faith. Some have even used the word sin to use any kind of antidepressant medication. Could you address that briefly?
Yeah, even mental health meds.
Yeah.
That's one of our bigger areas. I would suggest that if you think of your brain as an organ, meaning your stomach's an organ, your lungs are an organ, if God forbid, but if I get cancer, I am taking the cancer medicine, because I believe God has allowed through others to discover these things. There can be, one of the big complaints that I think is legit is that people, the medical community can overprescribe, but if that pain level is high enough, it's going to be one of your legitimate first steps, is to go to someone in the medical community that you trust. I'm sorry that there are people that don't diagnose well and do those other things, but please pursue that, because the brain itself is electrical and it's chemical. And if you have a true diagnosis of attention deficit, there may be something that would help you. You don't have to live that way. Depression, if you've only had one depression, that's much more treatable. If you're like me and you've had two, they say you're going to need to have some type of treatment along with counseling for a long time. Now, to example myself, I'm also a trauma survivor. So you've got to add all that. Not everybody has all that, Fred. So medication under proper use with a reliable health care giver, I'm very much pro that. As a matter of fact, when I work with people that have trauma, they come in with their emotions so difficult to control that if we don't do something, we can't even work. Right. I mean, you've got to sleep. Some of you are going, what's that, right? Yeah, but you really have to sleep. It's so regenerating and healing to the brain and the body. And if a person's not sleeping, someone good in the medical community is going to try to address that first. And even if it's medicated sleep for a while, it's better than that insomniac attack that hits us a lot of the time. So I am pro medication under the guidelines of a reliable medical care individual.
Yeah, and I would just add, and we have to close because we're out of time, but I believe God is always working to heal. Sometimes we need to have a discussion about healing. I believe God is always working. You don't have to, listen, we can ask God to please come in, but he's there already, and he's working. And sometimes the way he brings healing, I think he always participates with us. So he uses doctors and therapists and medications and other people like that to come around to help bring healing into our life. One organization I highly recommend online is called Grace Alliance. This is where the faith community and mental health come together with incredible articles, small group material, ways to help. So it's together, Grace Alliance, the faith community coming together with mental health experts to help us. But I would like to just to pray for some of you in the room right now. I don't know who may be watching online. We're going to close in a word of prayer. So maybe let's stand with me. And let's stand and we'll dismiss this. This will be the dismissal prayer. But I just want to pray for those of you listening right now and you're dealing with mental health issue personally, or maybe a family member and you're dealing with somebody with mental health. Would you pray with me? Let's bow our heads together. And Father, I'm praying right now for the person who maybe hasn't told anyone, but when we talk here today, they know that's them. They're in this. This is a crisis, depression, anxiety, the nervousness, it's impacting their daily lives. And then, Father, I'm praying for parents. I'm praying for spouses. I'm praying for friends who are seeking to, what do they do to help their friend or their spouse or their child? And Father, I just pray that everyone would know that you love them and that you are working in their lives. And I pray that you would give us wisdom to know how to participate with you, with helping and with healing. Lead us to the people that can help us, and give us your strength, and grant us your wisdom, and grant us your peace, and dismiss us now in your love. I pray in Jesus' name, amen. Thank you for coming. You're dismissed.